Hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode of The Bitter Pill. So today I'm joined by, and we've got three people watching officially. Awesome. So today I've got Jose Vega with me. Jose has been a longtime activist in various causes, most notably against the wars that the U.S. is almost always involved in. And recently, he's decided to run for Congress against scumbag Ritchie Torres, the uh, devout Zionist and promoter of all things Israel. So I was just mentioning to Jose before we started that I also ran for Congress back in 2002. Similar issues at hand back then. Of course, 2002 was in the lead up to the Iraq War. And so, I mean, that's one thing we could talk about is just the issues of running for Congress or whatever as a third party candidate, the criticisms you get just for doing that, and you just the issues with electoral politics in this country. So, well, what made you decide to run, Jose?
Yeah, it's a good question because it's one I've been wrestling with myself too. Some people have been telling me that the interventions alone have been more effective, but at some point, you have to get these people out. I mean, the
Yeah,
system itself is just overrun and corrupt by people. I mean, like Ritchie Torres is just one part of the problem. Now he calls himself like
right.
the congressional champion of Israel. I think they're all competing over there to see how much ass they can kiss when it comes to IPAC. And
Yeah,
sorry,
yeah.
I'm working.
Richie's gotten something like $500,000 from AIPAC or something over the course of his
Yeah,
career.
just on. I mean, yeah, IPAC is his biggest donor. And then he's got a whole other slew of like dirty, you know, political money behind him. Also, I'm trying to be a lot more candidatorial. It's been difficult for me because, you know, the background that I have, and I'm trying to speak in such a way that like some of the people I talk about, Jamal Bowman and AOC specifically, in these interviews I've been doing, possibly could be my colleagues, you know,
Yeah,
and so I have to like completely change the way in which I would approach things. Although I don't know, I think So back to the question at hand: why did I decide to run? Well, first of all, I think that what's going to happen in November is that people are going to be stripped of their dignity. People are going to have to go into that voting booth or into their caucus, whatever. And then they're going to have to make the choice of, okay, well, how do you want to be killed? Do you want to take a shot of poison? Do you want a bullet to
yeah,
the head? That's your options, right? And
yeah,
that's just presidential. And then there is the third option of Kennedy, which we could talk about it if you want to, but that's a whole other can of worms. Um,
yeah.
so
Well,
people have to make this decision, right, about how they want to be killed, and then they
yeah.
have to go
Well,
down this
I'll just
of
say
people.
RFK is the same worms as far as I'm concerned. I mean,
So then people have to go down the list of people whose names they don't know or recognize, right? Most people don't really bother investigating the candidates. That's what the party system
yeah,
was designed to do, to just say, okay, Democrat, whatever, here, I'll put my vote behind the Democrat, and then that's that, right? And that's just the
yeah,
same kind of bullshit. It's stripping Americans of their dignity, to
yeah,
perform this act. I'm not saying that the voting process itself is the stripping of the dignity, but the fact that the only choices on the ballot are completely awful and terrible, and
yeah,
you are degrading people by making them pick between the same bullshit that they've already been fed for the last 60 years.
yeah,
I don't
yeah.
want to I don't want to give my people, my constituency, that ability to degrade themselves. I want to give them a way out, and one of the ways to do it is to just be another option on the ballot, to be another name on the ballot that people can say, you know what, I'm not going to vote for the same thing. I'm going for something new.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting the bullshit that the Democrats give us that oh, if you have to vote for us to protect democracy. If you don't vote for us, you might help the big bad Republican win. And it's like, well, how is it democracy if you've designed a voting system to pressure me to vote for one of two candidates that I don't like because I might like the other one less? That's completely antithetical to democracy. And, of course, when I was running, especially since it was a close race between the Democrat and Republican, of course, I got a lot of the bullshit about your running is going to cause Barron Hill, the Democrat, to lose. And it's like, well, I mean, my running doesn't do anything except offer people the opportunity to vote for somebody else if they so choose. And, if you want whoever to win, vote for them and try to get other people to vote for them. But like you don't own anybody's vote. The Democrats think they own people's votes, and it's like, no, we own our votes, and it's up to you if you want to earn it. But they try their best to make sure people don't see it that way.
Exactly. That's why, and it's the here in the Bronx, in my district at least, and it's true for the district over New York 16, which is AOC. The voter turnout is abysmal. It's completely abysmal. It's very low, and I don't blame people. The electoral. You look at this community. The South Bronx is the poorest congressional district in the country. I believe something like 30% of people here live under the poverty line. And they look around and they say, what has electoral politics actually done for me?
Right.
I can't argue with them. You know why? Because it's true. The system sucks completely. And, and
people who don't vote are the ones, people who don't vote are typically those who, as you said, think that the system sucks and neither candidate is going to help them.
And they are not wrong. And on top of that, I mean, how I'll put it in a story because there are certain words. I know we're on YouTube, so I want to make sure your channel stays alive. I recently met with a former state elected official, and that's as far as I can say who this person was. And he told me, well, Jose, you should have ran as a Democrat, against Ritchie Torres. You would have gotten all the donations, you would have gotten all the support. You probably could have knocked them out. And I said, do you honestly think the electoral system, I'm not talking about the people, I mean the actual physical electoral system and the people who count the votes would allow me to actually do that, unseat Ritchie Torres? And he said, well, let me tell you a story. He said, I was there the night of the election when the Board of Elections took all the voting machines in New York City and locked them all up in the Board of Elections building and just started switching the votes around. I was like, this was a former state elected official, okay? Somebody was pretty high up there in Albany telling me this. And I said, have you ever come out and said this publicly? And he just was like, no. And he just kept telling me horror story after horror story. People know these. I mean, I think people know that there is electric frog. I hope you can figure out what that rhymes with. And people know that, and they know that there is no honest system. And that's another reason why people just don't go do it. And I think one of the main facets of my campaign is to restore transparency and trust in the elections again, because if you don't have that, there is no such thing as a democracy in this country. It's just fascism. You're just living in a totalitarian state already, and that has been the case since 2001 and up. And it's not good.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it seems like at times the Democrats don't even want to win. They are more concerned with making sure that people don't vote for somebody besides them or the Republicans. So, 2000, Florida was obviously rigged. I mean, even, aside from the issues that went before the Supreme Court about the actual vote count, there's all kinds of evidence that tens of thousands of mostly Black, mostly poor people were prevented from voting. Their voter registration was thrown out because they were falsely accused of being felons. And this sort of thing has happened in several elections, and neither party really talks about that.
And they're so all of this is going on. Like when somebody tells me that they don't want to vote, it's difficult for me to articulate why they should. And that's why my campaign is not, I'm not going to prostitute myself, because that's what the current electoral system is. It's, you should vote for me because I'm not the other guy. I'm a sexier guy. I'll whisper the things you want me to say. I'll say the things you want to hear. I'll do the things you want me to do to you. It's all prostitution. That's just what it is. And it's disgusting. And that was another thing that I was very apprehended by going into this, because it's like, do I have to do that? And my answer to that is no, I don't have to do that, because my campaign right now, the job of it is to inspire people into committing action, into committing real, productive, nonviolent, direct action. One of the things I want to do is redefine what it actually means to be from the Bronx. There was just a shooting that happened the other day where I believe 6 people were shot. 1 person was fatally wounded, and the shooters are still out there. The reason you have this violence is because the domestic policy, our domestic policy is our foreign policy. There is no difference. The Bronx has not been abandoned. The Bronx is the way it is because it is intentionally made that way. It is intentionally destroyed, just like many other communities around the country. Whether you're talking about Oakland, whether you're talking about Detroit, these communities are intentionally left this way on purpose, because there is a conscious effort to depopulate the country.
Yeah. And you often hear from our critics, why are you so focused on what's happening, over there in Gaza or over there in Ukraine or whatever? Why don't we focus on issues here at home? And it's like, well, who do you think's paying for those wars? You are. So there's a direct link between what we're doing abroad and what we're doing at home. And hopefully more people will make the connection.
I appreciate you saying that, because I get that every day from people who like, Jose, I like you. I want you to win, but like your people aren't thinking about what's going on in Gaza. They're thinking, what do the street cart vendor is thinking, what are you going to do for them? Right. My response to them on the street cart vendor is, well, the street cart vendor is not thinking, what am I going to do for him? He's thinking, what am I going to do for his kids? What am I going to do for the future of his family, for his grandkids? That's what he's thinking about, because that guy is not motivated by money. That guy is motivated by providing. That's what he's motivated by. He's motivated by surviving. He's not motivated by the actual cash itself. The cash itself is just the means to survive. That's more about what he cares about. And for there to be a future, first of all, it requires a reconstruction of our country. But in order to get that, it requires a complete retooling of our military-industrial complex. We spend $1 trillion in defense. A single drone that is used to blow things up costs $27 million, okay? It costs $27 million to invent something that's going to blow itself up. What could a school do with $27 million? What could 5 schools do with $27 million if you divvied it up, right?
You could probably build a school for about that amount of money, right? Something like that.
Probably somewhere, like a small scale school, maybe 100, 150 students or so, completely specialized school. You could probably do that. Maybe. Yeah. Not in New York City though. It just be way too cheap to make, but somewhere in like a rural South, state. $7 million could probably build a small high school somewhere, specialized in some kind of. Anyway, I'm thinking like the president, which we all should be thinking like the president. But, when I talk about retooling the military-industrial complex, I'm saying you got to take people who have skills, who can actually build things, and say, you're going to stop building bombs. What you're going to do is you're going to come to my neighborhood. you're going to teach kids how to build infrastructure. Okay. You're going to teach people how to actually build things that will be fruitful to the community and the country as a whole. That's what I'm talking about when I say retooling the military industrial complex, because you have manufacturing capabilities that exist already. It's just that they're manufacturing the things of destruction and war when they could be manufacturing things like high-speed rail. I mean, what's wrong with that? Or manufacturing things like advanced aeronautic parts, or advanced manufacturing parts, or advanced machine tools, right? Tools that build other tools. They could be building components for nuclear power plants around the country, to power things. I mean, these things are just like, and the thing is, like, Americans know this stuff. It's something that is obvious that if you pointed it out to people, they wouldn't believe it, because they would say, well, if that's true, then why aren't we doing it? Like, that's really what a lot of people are fighting against is, well, if it's so easy, why aren't we doing it? Yeah. You are right.
Well,
we're not doing it because that's not the policy. The policy is death and destruction. It's not about.
we're not doing it because of what we started out talking about, that the system is rigged, to favor the interests of this tiny minority of wealthy people, the bourgeoisie. But I was just gonna mention, in relation to what we've just been talking about, you were recently in China, which is investing huge amounts in their infrastructure, doing what you've said we should be doing here. So why don't you talk a little bit about what you saw and learned when you were over there?
Well, I had, like, China was the first country that I went to outside of my own country. I mean, I've always wanted to travel,
Mhm.
and to go to. I mean, first of all, for people who've never traveled, it's a daunting experience to go to any other country.
Yeah.
But
So you
but
haven't
then
been
to
to
go.
like El Salvador or anything?
No,
I know
well, when I was like
where
8
your
months old,
family's
I
from.
think something
What's that?
like,
Yeah.
when I was like a baby, I think my parents took me. I don't remember, going to El Salvador, but
Yeah.
you know, but but then being able to go to, like, the equivalent of Mars, basically,
Yeah.
was pretty daunting. Now, as a congressional candidate, I have to speak about my experience in China in a different way, because um, I'm no longer just a Jose Vega, the activist and the citizen. I'm a congressional candidate, and we struggled with this over there too, because at the time when I was not a candidate, I was there as a part of the Schiller Institute delegation, youth delegation, to go
Right.
to China and have a dialogue with the Chinese youth. So what that meant was, yeah, they were touring us around, they were taking us around, showing us China. We were also giving presentations at, like, Tsinghua University and some of the other top universities there in China. And oh yeah, I remember Xi Jinping had just published this white paper that came out in September 2023. I forgot what it was, but it was like this, like, hardcore white paper on U.S.-China relations and Chinese foreign relations as a whole. It was a pretty big deal that it came
Uh-huh.
out. And so we took it upon ourselves to read the entire thing while we were over there. And then we
Yeah.
incorporated it in our presentations as we were
Okay.
presenting, which is pretty cool.
Okay. So what sort of stuff was I haven't had a chance to read that. So what was in it and what did you talk about?
Well, first, like, for example, this was like, just, I think this was a stream of consciousness of people like Xi Jinping and other officials. They were outlining in this paper their outlook and their policy, and their also some of their criticisms of the United States. And then also what they are looking to do with the BRICS process, what they're looking to do with the World Land Bridge process. You know, like, one of the criticisms they had in the paper was that the problem is that the the United States has this power imbalance where you have an inconsistency because the president is only limited to 2 terms at best. What can you really do to actually shape the dynamics of a country long term in only 2 terms? You know, you look back to like FDR. FDR had he was
4
elected
terms.
for 4 terms. Yeah, although he died like towards the
Right.
beginning of his 4th term. But you know, could the United States have survived the Great Depression? Because he was elected in 33. If there were
Yeah.
term limits, he would have been out by 41. You know,
Yeah.
you would be in a completely different country. You needed a president like that to have 4 terms. And so he said what this creates is like an inconsistency in direction and orientation. And so this is what the Chinese white paper was going through. But to speak more generally to our trip in China, I mean, so we were there as part of the Schiller Institute youth delegation, and we were there to represent the best of the United States. But when you're in China, it's a little difficult to do because, like, you know, I live in the Bronx, and many of my friends don't live in some of the wealthier areas. You know, there's potholes everywhere in the United States, right? There's homelessness everywhere in the United States. And when you're in this country, you know, the streets are clean, people are happy. And when we were out by ourselves at night, you know, they were giving us hotels in like the center of the town. When we were there and we could just talk to the population, a lot of people there know English.
Yeah.
You know, you ask them about the relationship between the US and China, they acknowledge it's bad, and they say, but we hope it gets fixed. They say, because US and China are brothers and it should be fixed, and it, you know, we pray for good. Like, that's how the people over there think about US-China relations, that there should be good relations. But, you know, you ask the population here, they think China is like the number one boogeyman, you know, because of the propaganda that's going on.
Right.
So, you know, but so it was a little difficult for us in the beginning to try and actually be, you know, the stalwarts and the champions of, you know, the United States and the ideas of it. And thankfully, we were able to tap into our understanding of U.S. history and of where, you know, U.S.-China relations actually started. You know, it goes way back to Lincoln, and even before Lincoln. But Lincoln was the first president with his first foreign diplomat, Anson Burlingame, who was the first U.S.-China diplomat. And that's when U.S.-China relationships first began. And it's always been helpful and productive. And the Chinese diaspora here in the United States, you know, that is America, because a lot of them came, a lot of them built our railroads, and a lot of them had some of the worst experiences here. I mean, you know, you want to talk about racism in the Chinese community, you know, like that needs to be addressed and atoned for at some point. But, you know, that is American history. And we were able to bring also the ideas and the coherence between people like Sun Yat-sen, who some people call the Chinese George Washington, and his economic policies, together with you know, Lyndon LaRouche's economic policies, as well as those of Alexander Hamilton, you know, and like these were the kind of presentations we were giving. And hopefully I can, honestly, the reason we didn't publish them was just because it was my fault. I mean, I got the videos and stuff, and I just never got around to editing it together. But there's some videos out there, and hopefully I can use some of it in my campaign material to you know, showcase these presentations. But I mean, just, and speaking in like a general sense on like the trip, we got to see pandas, you know, we got to go to some rural villages. Like, we went to this place called Saduha Village, and like Saduha Village, something like 30 years ago, was something, I think, impoverished or something, and now it's like the #1 village for chestnut production around the world. And you know, you talk to the villagers, and you talk. We were visit the, basically like the equivalent of the mayor was taking us around, and he knew all of the villagers' name, and all of the villagers respected him. All of the villagers knew that if they had some kind of issue, they could just go to him. So this is just like what I saw and I experienced over there. You know, I mean, that's a government that cares for their people. That's all it is. And you know, that's that's their system of government.
Yeah, and we of course aren't going to hear about it here because of the propaganda of the corporate media, but they've done tons and tons of polls of Chinese citizens about what they think of their government and all sorts of other things, and as you said, people there seemed to you to be basically happy, and the polls reflect that they have the highest approval rating of their government of any country in the world. I mean, that doesn't mean there's not problems and issues. We could talk about that, but in general, they're doing more to serve the interests of the majority of the people than just about anywhere else.
There's no real homogeneity in terms of how people think about politics. I mean, everyone there is super enthusiastic about Xi Jinping. But then when you get down to nitty-gritty stuff, like even, people who are in the Communist Party are like, yeah, sometimes I openly disagree with the party on certain policy issues, and that was the other thing that surprised me there too, is that we really, I mean, I was a little apprehensive going into the country because, like, even though I know a lot of it is propaganda and stuff, I'm like, yo, what if some of this is true? What if some of, like, you really can't say things or you can't do certain. They let us ask any questions we wanted to. They let us, they toured us around, And the funny thing is they would be the first ones to tell you, like, listen, the way our government works because of our 5,000-year history, and it just works for us. And they're saying, like, we are not advocating for other governments around the world to have this system. America should run the way America wants to be run, And he said, like, this was our tour guides and stuff. They said, like, this is just the way our government works because it's a culmination of our culture and our history. And we understand that other governments are going to just function differently because they have completely different backgrounds. And they're like, our job is to just learn how to coexist and cooperate with other governments and other cultures. And so that was my biggest takeaway, is that, the opportunity for great diplomatic relations between our countries are there.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah, and I get that sense from I'm sure you caught Tucker Carlson's interview with Vladimir Putin the other night, and I get that sense from them too, that if only the U.S. were willing, there could be a peaceful, positive relationship with Russia too. But our government doesn't want that. Oh gosh, what was I going to say? A friend of mine who lives over there, Jerry Gray. You might be familiar with him since you follow China somewhat. But anyway, he was telling me that in his experience, there, like, people protest in China all the time. Typically, they protest against local government officials. Is that that's who they directly elect, and that's who most directly affects policies in their community. But somebody actually did a study and found that there were more protests of this or that policy in China than there are in the United States. Or lots of other countries. So it's not like people are afraid to voice dissent about things there. That's not the case at all.
Oh yeah, no, it's there were some. I think this was a couple of years ago. There were some broadcasted internationally protests, going on in I forgot what region of China, but no, people have a big say in their government. It's not at all. This what people say is like, no, it's whatever the party line is. Like, one of the benefits that we got to going there was seeing the way in which the multi-party system works. So they have a board there. It's like called like the CCP. I don't remember, but it's basically this board that consists of the 8 other major parties in China, which people don't even realize that there are other parties in China, and they do get a say in the government despite not having a majority representation. And their job is to outreach to the community and say, listen, this law or this policy was recently enacted. You should have seen this change. Do you agree that you saw this change? to what effect did this law help you or whatever, and their job is to go survey the community, and then they have to go and report back to the government, like, listen, like, this law that you passed is helping people or it's not helping people. This is the feedback we got, right? And the government does listen. One of the best discussions we had was with I forgot who it was, but they told us, like, the way they see their government there and the way the elected officials see themselves there. And again, this is them. Again, and this is all just what I experienced, but the way the elected officials see themselves over there is they consider themselves to be like the mother, father of their citizenry, and they're supposed to take care of their citizens, and so if somebody goes up to an elected official and they says, I need a job, they'll help them find a job. They say, I can't tell this story. I can't tell this one. You gotta come up here in person. I can tell you this one, if they need some help with their housing, we'll help them find some kind of housing. If they want a girlfriend, that's what he said. We'll help them find a girlfriend, and that's a big deal over there. They're trying to come back from the 2-child policy. That
one-child policy, yeah.
Well, it was 1 child and it was 2-child. Now I think that's been and now there's no limit, I don't think. And
and there never was any limit for people in Xinjiang, contrary to the propaganda about what went on there.
Yeah. No, there is a very big Uyghur population over there too. We did not go to Xinjiang, but like in the region that we were in Beijing, and then we went down to Sichuan. We saw Uyghurs there. You see, like, you also saw the indigenous people there too. And they're great. There were some Uyghur restaurants in Beijing. There was one in Chengdu that we got to go to. Also, a lot of Mongolian food that we had while there too. It was my time in China. I would encourage more Americans to just go and visit. A flight there is pretty expensive, but when you're there, the cost of living is like stupid cheap. I mean, it was something like 70 cents, the equivalent of 70 cents USD for like a can of soda. And the food over there is like so much better, and like the fast food over there, you won't feel like crap after eating it. And I would highly recommend anybody who goes there should go there and just go see for yourself. You'll have a good time.
And you'll be able to travel anywhere within the country for really cheap there too. From what I understand, the fares on their high-speed rail are like ridiculously cheap.
Oh yeah, we got to go on the high-speed rail. That was a lot of fun too.
Yeah.
I got to go back sometime.
Yeah.
After I saved my country, I got my country.
Yeah. Or if our country is beyond saving, maybe we could flee there.
I'm going down with this ship. I gotta save it.
Yeah.
I love this country. I am a patriot. I am a patriot. I love American history. I do love this country. I think this was Bob Dylan. I can't remember who. It was some hippie I'm sorry, I shouldn't call him a hippie. It was some hippie in the 60s or 70s who said, where is America? Because at the time there was a Vietnam War, there was segregation going on, there was a civil rights, right? And there's this idea of the United States and this idea of America being this great nation of liberty and hope. And so people say, like, well, where is it? And like, that's very applicable to today. I do not consider the government that we have now to be the American government. I mean, yes, all these people technically belong to a body called the American government, but this is not what our founding fathers envisioned at all. I'm proud to be from the Bronx, where Gouverneur Morris, one of the founding fathers, who people don't even know, he penned the Constitution, but also he wrote the preamble, we the people of the United States. Those are his words. And he's buried here in the Bronx, and this was where he had his estate, the Molisania estate. I mean, that's who I am at the end of the day. Like, that is me, that I am somebody who tries to use the ideals of the best parts of the American, gestalt, the American the principle that, people like Hamilton and Gouverneur Morris had, for what they thought a real country should look like and what a real American government should look like. And so, when people say we should dismantle the American government, yeah, maybe the current people in charge now, but the reason why the American system works so well is because it is dependent upon its population to take responsibility for it. And so ultimately, like, the biggest failure of the American system has not been the people we've elected, it's been the people who are electing is the problem.
Yeah. Yeah, and like you suggested, I mean, no matter what period of American history you look at, there have been people like you who have been fighting for justice. No matter what the time or the issue, and that's always been a constant in American politics.
Yeah.
Tell us about how you got involved in activism. So talk about the disaster with your apartment, or I think that's what you've said got you initially active.
Well, it actually goes to, and there's a documentary on me about this now on Due Dissidence. I don't
Yeah,
know.
everybody, please check out. It's put out by the guys who do Dissidents. Is it Kynan and Russell?
Keaton and Russ.
Keaton, yeah.
Yeah, they're good guys. They're my friends, and they've been awfully supportive in my campaign. They made this great documentary. Well,
I'll put a link in the description, but yeah, check it out for sure, guys.
The way I got started, I mean, it really goes back to when I first got associated with the LaRouche organization back in like 2014 or so. And that's when I really started learning about, what people would call today the imperialism of the United States. Right. So that's when I that's also when I'm becoming like conscious of the world, and I'm becoming, a teenager, and I'm also a little rebellious at the time, as that's which is what you are when you're 16 years old or 15 years old, right? It's just,
yeah.
And you're also naturally iconoclastic, and so this is when I'm learning about the war crimes of Bush, and I'm learning about Obama's war crimes, and I'm learning about Edward Snowden. That was kind of like the big thing going on at the time that I was becoming politically conscious, and taking the time to learn what's going on, understanding the atrocities, understanding the last 50 years of American history and how we've assassinated world leaders around the world, how we set up banana republics, all of the bad things, you start learning about that. But more importantly, beyond that, is learning that there is an alternative to it all. I think that's kind of where I get my optimism from too, because anybody can tell you, I mean, and the Gray Zone people do an amazing job. Max Blumenthal, Aaron Mate, those guys are great. They can do a great job of telling you the problem. What I find is that not a lot of people are telling you the solution. And Ray McGovern, has a great thing about this. He says, no more awards for predicting rain, only for building arcs, And I really do, believe that. I think we shouldn't just be talking about how bad things are, but that there is a possibility for an alternative solution, an alternative vision around the world, that the United States doesn't need to be the way it is right now, and things can be different. And so that's where my kind of passion and activism came from. And then, I had this thing with my apartment happen where, you go through, so I had my ceiling had kind of caved in, and all this sewage water had come in, and I was homeless. And, in the interim between that incident happening and becoming homeless, I went to my councilman's office, and I called the media, I got a lawyer pro bono. And at the end of the day, I lost, because I went through the steps you're supposed to take. I went to my elected official, and the elected official was the main one who told my mom, you'll never be allowed to rent again in the state if you if you let your son take this to court, and you'll never be allowed to live in New York State anymore. And then he tried to buy me off by saying, what if somebody came to you with $15,000? Would you let all this go?
Mhm.
I said, like, no. I'm not.
American democracy, huh?
Yeah, like, or the guy who's supposed to be fighting for me, right? Is telling me,
Yeah.
"Hey, let it go." And I was telling him, dude, how many people is this happening to in your district alone? Like, let's fight this. Let's make some real systemic
Right.
change. Let's draft up some policy. Let's do something. And like, no, you're the one in front of me now. And this was the chief of staff telling me this. And then the councilman himself would walk in, and then he would patronize me. Oh, look, councilman, I'm looking at the next mayor here. I'm looking at the next governor here. This guy has a passion, a spirit. It's like, fuck you. Why do I have to? You're the one in front of me. You're a policymaker. Let's do something here. And so ultimately, I kind of really became disillusioned with the establishment. And that's when I really understood, like, it's all bullshit. All city politics, congressional politics, it's all dirty. It's not real. I guess that's the biggest takeaway, is that it's not real. It's a facade. It's an illusion. These people have no real authority. Okay, they are not real. They are just set up there, like stick figures, like shadows in a cave. Like, the politicians are the shadows in the cave. They don't actually dictate anything in terms of policy. They don't do anything. They just exist to just sit there and take a paycheck and not actually care about you. And so that's when I got a fire under my ass. And I said, all right, well,
Yeah.
I could sit here and mope about this. And I have moped about it. I have cried about it. And I said, I could sit here and do that, but we got to move, and we got to fix things, and we got to, we got to make sure that this doesn't happen to anybody else again. So,
Yeah. Well, speaking of that, we just had a comment come in from somebody. I'll put it up on the screen here. And so you get your response to that. You've been talking about domestic policy some, but I guess this guy wants to hear more, or he wants you to hear what he thinks, or
half of the domestic has to be what your policy plan for the country is, and the other half has to be what you're going to do for your district. I'm going to offer my domestic policy plan to you right here. Okay. Hold on. I have my domestic policy plan here. It's yet to be published on my website, but we're hoping to have it all up by Friday. Hold on. I'll pull it up here. Kynan wrote this beautiful policy plan out. Hold on, where is it? I guess we can take the time here to read it, because it is pretty good, and I've been sending it around to people too. Here we go. Now let me see here. Is this the one with the updated statistics? All right, so our domestic policy is called Creating a Space CCC to Rebuild the Bronx in the U.S. And it starts like this. The young people of the South Bronx today are faced with a miserable and hopeless future, ultimately the result of 50 years of benign neglect, planned shrinkage, and indifference of those who have shaped New York City's financial and related policies. A report from New York Comptroller Thomas DiNapoli revealed in December 22 that the Bronx had the highest poverty rate in the state at around 24%. The South Bronx itself has over 40% of its children living in poverty. The report further adds that among 16 to 24-year-olds in New York City, 18% of them are unemployed, with unemployment among young men hovering at around 24%. This is merely a picture, not a whole overview of the problem. However, since the figures provided most likely underestimate the nature of the problem. A similar situation confronted the United States in the onset of the Great Depression in 1929, where all had seemed to be lost for Americans who lost their homes, life savings, and the ability to provide for their families' basic necessities. By the time Franklin Roosevelt was inaugurated in 1933, at least a third of the working population was unemployed. Roosevelt, within only 100 days of its administration, realized the need to revive and transform the gutted physical economy of the United States through rigorous, extensive programs. One of these programs was the Civilian Conservation Corps. Okay, so then we go through what the Conservation Corps was. Basically, It allowed young men, 3 million young men between the ages of 18 to 25, to learn productive labor, what it meant to be disciplined, cooperative work. It allowed them to become literate. A lot of them were illiterate, a lot of them were impoverished, a lot of them were demoralized, troubled youth. And by the end of their training, they would come out intelligent, skilled, productive, and they developed a really good work ethic. And this program was ended in 1941 because at that point we had gone into the war in World War II, but this was the national policy of FDR. And what this did was it allowed the young men to build roads, bridges, infrastructure, and most importantly, it allowed tons of acres of forestry and parks to be built. And so when we're talking about a place like the Bronx, right, we're talking about building a model of the CCC for the Bronx. And so, okay, picking up here, I would take this worthy precedent one step further. While many enrollees will be given intensive on-the-job training, this is what we would do today. We would take people who are between the ages of 18 and 25, young men, women, men or women. We will be given intensive on-the-job training. A clear educational curriculum will be provided in order to ensure grounding in basic elementary subjects, along with the ability to read and write, in order to construct many of these projects. So these projects being housing, hospitals, infrastructure repairs like sewage and whatnot, or advanced infrastructure projects like high-speed rail, or if we want to address just the Bronx, which I think is an abhorrent idea, to only look at your district. But of course, my district is the one that is the most impoverished, and I would, of course, make sure that my district is the first one to get this program, because the idea is we would export these kinds of camps around the country. Here we go. An enrollee who's 16 will spend 2 to 3 years mastering their trade. By the time they're 22, they will become a skilled engineer contributing to the modernization of their communities and neighborhoods. A cultural program based on classical principles of art, music, and poetry, reflected in the works of Beethoven, Mozart, Leonardo da Vinci, and other such luminaries, will be added to the curriculum in order to inspire and increase the creative capabilities of each student's mind and heart. In a truly productive economy based on advanced technological discoveries and principles, there is no difference between science and art. Beyond transforming and modernizing the U.S. economy, participants in the Space CCC will be given the mission of exploring new exciting frontiers in space and contributing to the leading thrust of a new revitalized space program. Go back to the Apollo program under President Kennedy in the 1960s. During that time, over 400,000 people, representing 35% of the workforce, was employed directly and indirectly on the Apollo project. We had devoted 4.4% of the national budget to space, and we benefited enormously from that investment, earning approximately $10 back from every dollar spent. That's not simply a monetary figure, but a representation of the scientific technologies that were developed and later inputted into the physical economy to make it more advanced and productive. As a member of the U.S. Congress representing New York's 15th, I will fully commit to making the South Bronx a model for a new, advanced, productive labor force composed of the now neglected youth of the city. The United States is now on the precipice of an unprecedented financial meltdown, as is reflected in the now $34 trillion national debt and the soaring interest payments arising from such debt, as was revealed in the 2008 financial crisis. Hold on. Almost done here. As was revealed in the 2008 financial crisis, the economy is essentially dead, surviving on the reckless creation of liquidity into an over-indebted system at the cost of neglecting the physical capabilities of the economy. A revised U.S. workforce not based on the so-called service economy, but on the real productivity, will put the nation's United States on the right track, as FDR did for the nation, to bring it out of depression. Okay, that's my domestic policy. In one of my domestic policies.
Awesome.
And that was
I'm sorry, go ahead.
That was a condensed version. I was kind of like skipping through and trying to summarize it for our audience.
Yeah. Several things come to mind here. First of all, obviously, we have a casino economy. It's completely financialized. It's not based on producing things anymore. And we need government intervention to try and rectify that. Second thing that came to mind, you mentioned the importance of the arts in people's like development and consciousness and so forth, and that's something you've talked a lot about before. Actually, I didn't pursue it much myself, but I come from a musical family. My sister wound up becoming a music professor. Played piano her whole life. So that's always been really important to me. So maybe you could talk about how that's a source of inspiration and so forth for people, music and other arts. And then a third thing that came to mind, I'm just saying all this right now, so between the two of us, we can remember it all. One thing you didn't mention in your policy statement is what your public health policy would be. And of course, that's been a big issue here in the United States and around the world, since the pandemic has, killed so many millions of people, made many more than that seriously ill or long-term ill from long COVID. And, both parties have been, an abysmal failure in terms of addressing that problem. So, I was curious, like, how you would approach, preparing for the next pandemic, not that we're out of this one, or just in general, public health policy.
Sure. All right, man. You're like trying to fit these in before we have to leave at 1. Okay.
Yeah.
I'll start with the art question. I'll give you a good example. Last Wednesday, and also this Wednesday too, I'll be going to an open mic night for poetry. And there I recited 2 poems. I recited Ozymandias from Percy Shelley, and I recited Stopping by the Woods on a Snowy Evening by Robert Frost. And I think to kind of summarize that question, because you and I could talk about art, especially the fact that we're a musical family. When you say musical family, like what do you mean? What did you guys grow up playing? Classical, folk music?
My parents met in the choir at university, and they both sang and and my mom played the piano, and were very interested in classical music. And then my sister in particular grew up with that and eventually became a professional musician. And I only played very briefly, but I've always been like, I listen to everything, like jazz, classical, you name it, except for a lot of modern crap. But music has always been very important to me, and depending on the type of music, it can provide inspiration in different ways. Just whether it be to brighten your mood or get you to think about something, or to challenge social injustice, if it's lyrical music devoted to that.
Yeah, well, I will I'll tell you this, all art is political. Like you cannot, all great art is political, and that is true for Bach, that is true for Mozart, and that is true for Beethoven, and then that's true for people who interpret the music, like Furtwängler, because Furtwängler at his time, I mean, he was, using the music. I mean, it's a struggle for Furtwängler, and it goes beyond this. I'm only capturing like the surface of it. Furtwängler is trying to bring the best out of what it means to be a classical music lover while he is in occupied Nazi Germany, right? I believe he never saluted Hitler. And one of the reasons why Yehudi Menuhin played with Furtwängler after the Nazi era was over was because Yehudi Menuhin wanted to show to the world that Furtwängler was not a Nazi and not an anti-Semite. Well, let me not go off track here, because again, there's a lot of conversations we can have just on the very political nature of art. But here's my answer to that and the importance of it, which is that, Kennedy had actually said these words in Amherst College when he was thanking Robert Frost. And he said, "The artist, however faithful to his personal vision of reality, becomes the last champion of the individual mind and sensibility against an intrusive society in an officious state. The great artist is thus a solitary figure. He has, as Frost said, a lover's quarrel with the world. In pursuing his perceptions of reality, he must often sail against the currents of his time. This is not a popular role. If Robert Frost was much honored in his lifetime, it was because the good many preferred to ignore his darker truths. Yet in retrospect, we see how the artist's fidelity has strengthened the fiber of our national life. If sometimes our great artists have been the most critical of our society, it is because their sensitivity and their concern for justice, which must motivate any true artist, makes him aware that our nation falls short of its highest potential. I see little more of importance to the future of our country and our civilization than full recognition of the place of the artist. If art is to nourish the roots of our culture, society must set the artist free to follow his vision wherever it may take him. We must never forget that art is not a form of propaganda, it is a form of truth. And as Mr. McLeish once remarked of poets, there is nothing worse for our trade than to be in style. In a free society, art is not a weapon and it does not belong to the spheres of polemic and ideology. Artists are not engineers of the soul. It may be different elsewhere. But democratic society, in its highest duty of the writer, the composer, the artist, is to remain true to himself and to let the chips fall where they may. And so he goes on this way, and I recommend, you and anybody else who loves art and who calls themselves an artist should read that, because I think it's very true. And so when I recited, I started with those remarks last week at this open mic, and I started by telling everyone there, I do not envy those who call themselves artists, including all of you, because that's quite a responsibility to have, to say you are going to be the one that's critical of society and you will be the one to, it's an unpopular role. It's a lover's quarrel with the world, as Kennedy said. So that's in a nutshell what and believe me, we could go on way more. Maybe we should have an episode dedicated to just art. But now, to answer my public health policy, in the 1930s, there was a standard called the Hill-Burton Standard. And I believe the Hill-Burton Standard was that for every 1,000 Americans, I believe you need something like 3 or 4 beds available for every 1,000 Americans, should there be a national emergency like a pandemic. Now I believe we only have 0.5 beds for every 1,000 Americans or something. And that was true even before COVID, and that was true during COVID. That was one of the reasons why a lot of people died. It wasn't necessarily that COVID itself was such a lethal and deadly disease. It's that the conditions of the United States are equivalent, probably worse than that of a third world country, but we dress it up in what what the former U.S. Surgeon General calls, Joycelyn Elders. She says, we don't have the most expensive healthcare system in the world. We have the most expensive death care system in the world, meaning we can prevent you from dying, but we're not going to make sure you live a fruitful life. There's a reason why the United States has such a high obesity rate, has a high diabetes rate, has such a, the life expectancy is going lower, is because our healthcare system is not designed to actually make sure that people can live healthy, productive lives. It can prevent you from dying, but that doesn't do a whole heck of a lot, So we need to actually completely redefine. First of all, we need way more hospitals, because we've shut down so many hospitals, and, the Space CCC will make sure that people can build it. But also the Space CCC has to include a section where you can have young men and women who want to be nurses to staff these hospitals do so, but then if you think about it, okay, if you're going to have a national focus project on an expansion of hospitals, you also need doctors to staff it, which means you have to have an expansion of medical professionals and medical scientists, people who are willing to actually do the research and the work to be the doctors and to be the people who want to staff it. So that means, it's like a rising tide. Basically, it's going to raise all ships. So your population will require itself to be educated to fill the roles of what you want and need. Then all policy will follow after that. If you change the orientation of a country, your policy will follow. Our orientation right now is trying to be the bully around the world, so our policy follows that. What if our policy around the world right now was retooling our military bases so that, those military bases could be used as vectors for people in countries to actually get the aid they need? Or you set up Army Corps of Engineers stations in each of those military bases, and we actually start building infrastructure of the countries that we've destroyed as a way to atone for years of imperialism and colonialism. Is that not a form of reparations? So,
Yeah.
I'll end it there.
Yeah. Well, of course, China, took steps to prevent a lot of steps to prevent people from getting sick in the first place early on in the pandemic, and they were highly successful with that. And then eventually they lifted the restrictions a bit too quickly, I thought, but in any case, that by the time they did that, virtually everyone was vaccinated, only more than 90% vaccination, and that they had the hospital and healthcare facility capacity to be able to handle virtually everybody getting infected. And clearly that wasn't the case in the United States or really most every Western country. In fact, some of it's because they have trouble counting all the deaths, but in general, poorer countries actually had less of a death toll from COVID than wealthier countries. And because despite spending all that money on healthcare, they just spent it in foolish ways, and they didn't use resources wisely in order to keep things in check. And then the other thing I want to mention, which nobody's really done much about yet, including China or anybody else that managed COVID fairly well, is back in the Roosevelt era that you were talking about. I mean, they made a concerted effort to clean up the water so that diseases like polio and dysentery and so forth and so on became much less common. But there hasn't been even much discussion of an effort to clean up the air, to have filtration, ventilation built into public buildings. That, like, if there was a massive investment in that, I mean, we wouldn't have to worry so much about wearing masks in the middle of a pandemic, although that's helpful too. But the air would just be cleaner indoors in the first place. Fewer viruses, less illness, better health of the population. Our economy is healthier when people are healthier. So,
Exactly. All right, let me just address the last question that came in here. Do I support lineage-based reparations for those of us who are descendants of enslaved people in the country? Yes, I do. But I don't think the US dollar is the answer to that, because I don't know. There's and maybe I'm wrong about this. I could be convinced otherwise. Can you really put a dollar? Can you really put a price on 400 years of slavery and then just call that atonement and reparations? I don't think so. I do support reparations, but I think reparations has to come in the form of actually something physical. You address the injustice that you did, but you also set up the communities that you've destroyed, like whether it's Detroit or Bronx or this one or that one, and you say, okay, listen, we really fucked these places up, and we did that intentionally, and yes, we were trying to kill the people here. So how do you actually address and atone that? Do you just give everyone money? I don't think that will work, because how does that guarantee that policy will actually be lifted? It doesn't. I think you actually have to lift that policy, but replace it with productivity, with what I'm talking about, and you prioritize the neighborhoods that have been destroyed first as a way of addressing reparations. I mean, that's as far as I'll say. And I'll say, like, I'm open to the argument of the monetary based reparations. I just don't think it's dignifying to tell people, here's a ton of money, forget it ever happened,
Yeah.
But I think it does need to be addressed, and I think it needs to be addressed in a physical manner that I'm talking about, because the way to address 400 years of oppression and repression and slavery is by making sure that you have 400, that you guarantee at least 400 years of prosperity. How can we make sure that the next 400 years or the next 4,000 years are prosperous, and that we actually address what happened? So that's my answer.
Yeah, I agree. Yes, some sort of reparations are needed, but how do we bring that into effect without creating a whole bunch of resentment from people who aren't getting reparations because they aren't part of those groups. And you do it, I think, by investing in the country as a whole, which we're not doing. We're not investing in our infrastructure. We're some groups of people in our country need reparations, but we all need more public investment here at home. And we do the least of that of any country in the world that can afford to do it. So.
All right, I gotta run, man. Jeff, we gotta do this again.
Yeah, definitely. Let's do it again. There's so much else I wanted to talk to you about, but only so much you can get in an hour and 5 minutes. Thank you so much, Jose.
I'll just let Roger know. Again, I could probably be convinced on it. You just have to if we had a public forum on it, I'd be happy to share my perspectives and listen to what people are saying. I just don't think. And he cites the Japanese Americans got cash reparations. Did that really address the injustice that had happened? I don't think so. I think the internment camps were absolutely horrible, and what are we saying? Well, they got paid for it, so it's okay. I don't think so. So anyway, but again, I'm open to it, and or maybe we could do a thing where we hold a town hall and then I just don't take his question. I'll only take written questions and I'll only answer the ones I like. And then Roger
all right. Following in your predecessor's footsteps there.
Yeah, right.
Thanks so much for coming on, Jose. And I will put Jose's campaign site and other stuff in the description, and I really hope we can do this again sometime soon, and maybe we can do a spaces on Twitter sometime soon as well. But anyway, so much we didn't get a chance to talk about, but I look forward to having you back on again soon. And everybody, please the video and subscribe to my channel, subscribe to Jose's stuff, and let's get the message out there.
All right, man. Take care, man. I gotta go.
All right. Take care, Jose.